All right, I'll give you 30 more seconds. Hopefully you've gotten it ready to go, and we will keep going. Okay, so let's keep going. Hopefully you have your Cloud9 up. If you came late, then just start doing that while I'm talking. Agenda today, we started talking about Flask last time, and now we're gonna keep going. We are gonna actually start coding with it and then get into how to do like HTML and CSS stuff to make a very basic front end web page. And then I'll finally be giving you some work time. Xavier, you said your environment's gone. That should be weird. Make sure you're on the right classroom and account and everything like that, and then we can talk about it more. One thing, hopefully you guys all got the chance to do homework 3. I wanted to just review 2 things that were common questions. One was there didn't have to be output in some of the questions. For example, make CD doesn't actually output anything. So you could have just left it blank or said no output, and that would have been okay. And then next thing is some of you were a little confused just about the naming for arguments in a function like foo and bar. In Bash, you can't really give a name to your argument directly for a function. You just have to refer to it as 1 or 2. So hopefully you did that. But also if you wanted to get fancy, you could set a variable foo equal to your argument that you wanted. So that's just 2 things to review. Let's keep going. I wanted to, before we start today, just ask you about how useful the structure of these demos are for you, and get a sense from the whole class just how you feel about it. Like I was talking about in the first lecture, like I definitely want to, I respect your guys' voices, and I always want to hear like the best way to teach you guys. So if you ever have feedback about something that's not working how you're hoping, then I hope that you can let me know. But here's a poll just to do that. And I also want to just see like where we're starting in terms of HTML and CSS. So I know how many like resources to provide and how much time to spend. So here's the poll, just launched it. Please take a look. There's 3 questions and go ahead and answer them. All right. 70% voted, moving fast. 80%, 90%. Let's see. 3 more people. And if you can't see the poll, just chat me and let me know. All right, I'll give 5 more seconds and I'm closing the poll. Anybody else? Okay, 95%, 97%, I'll take it. All right, so here are the results. It looks like 72% said that it's useful, you follow along in your Cloud9, and then 21% said it's useful and you watch that following along. That's also a good way to do it. A few of you said you prefer a live demo, and that's more for like more interactivity. I can take that into account for just like some of them maybe. And then With HTML, it looks like half of you are comfortable with it, and then half of you are not or haven't used it. And then similar thing with CSS, but a little bit lower. That's okay. That's totally okay. I'm not assuming that you know any of it. I just wanted to get a sense, and we're going to make sure, that half of you are fully up to speed with the basics. And then, of course, you're going to have to learn things on your own. Okay. Well, I will take that into account, but for now, let us go into our first demo, actually. I'm going to stop sharing and open up the demo. So same thing as last time, just chat me if there's questions while you're going, and I will either pause or I'll just keep going and answer them. And hopefully the quality should be better this time. I'm just going to use QuickTime instead of YouTube. All right, so hopefully everybody's ready. You have your Cloud9 if you want to follow along, and we are going to start. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Flask and actually coding with it. Hopefully you got the chance to install the library last class or during your homework. One thing you can do to double check is write in your terminal flask -- version, and the output should say that you're running Flask 1.1.2. Cool. Next thing I'm going to do is just make a directory for my lecture 4 work that I'm going to be doing. So mkdir lecture 4, and then I'm going to cd into lect4 and create a new file called app.py. And then final step is to actually open app.py in my text editor. And if you have your aliases and functions already set up from last time, then you could do that a lot faster. So now let's start writing those 10 lines of code that we were talking about to set up a very basic web server. I'm just going to take this straight from the documentation, and you can too on the Flask website. The first thing you want to do is import the Flask class, which we're going to be using. Next thing is to create this variable called app, which is just going to be an instance of this class. And we're going to put name here, which is just kind of the default when we don't have multiple apps or things running. And then finally, the last thing we need to write is we're going to use this decorator and define the root and have a function for that decorator, which defines when you go to the root, how do you actually handle it. So this is a function called hello world, doesn't matter what it's called, and it's just going to return a very simple string, hello world. I'm going to save this file. So you don't need to worry about like what this Python decorator is. I haven't used Python in a while, so I can't even explain it well. But the main thing to remember is what's happening here is we're able to connect this route or this kind of URL with this function. So your server knows that if the client is trying to hit this endpoint, which is just the most basic slash kind of like your index homepage type thing, then it's going to run the logic that's under there in that function. And then you can have a bunch of different routes, such as this, but have like /2, and then have another function here and so on. And that's how you slowly can build your app or API how you want it. So for now, we're just going to do this original one. And the way that we actually run this server is you simply do in the terminal Python and then the name of your file, so app.py. You press enter. Oh, actually, forgot one more last piece of code. You need to actually run the app when you have this file. So you're just going to add this one line of code, app.run, at the bottom, and that's going to actually initialize it. So now let's run the file and see what happens. Python app.py. You're going to see a message show up. It's saying serving Flask app, environment production, there's going to be a warning. You don't need to worry about that because we are in development mode. And it's going to say running on this address here with your IP and then the port 5000. So this is kind of, we have everything running now, and how can we actually test it? To do that, the easiest way is to click preview at the top, and then you can say preview running application, and it's going to open up a little browser here. You can also move this browser to its own tab if you want to, but for now I'm just going to leave it here. So there's an error. It's saying, oops, no application seems to be running here. Let's look through and see what the actual error is saying. It's kind of long, so I'm actually going to open up into a new tab. So you can click that arrow there, and then as you can see, we're on our own Chrome tab now. So let's see what this error message is saying. Here's some suggestions on how to fix it. Check that you have access to your environment. You're signed into Cloud9. I am definitely signed into Cloud9. No issues there. Check that your server is successfully running. It is running. It says right here that it's running. I'm not in the middle of debugging. And then here, this is the key point that we have to take into account, actually. The server might be running on a different port. Make sure it runs on port 8080. Right now, we're actually running it on port 5000, as I was saying. You can tell based on the address that's written here. So we're not routing this through the right port, and we're going to have to customize that so we can do that. Okay, I'm going to play the next part of the video, but let me know if you have any questions or you need me to slow down. Okay, no questions so far for Michael. Cool. Let's continue then with the next. So to fix this, you simply need to manually add some code to app.run so you can choose which port you want to be listening on. So to do that, you just need to add this line, port equals, and then int os.getEnv port 8080. And here we're actually setting it. And again, you don't need to worry about like what this code actually is. Just know that it's doing good things for us. And IDE is showing an error here. You can hover over it and see undefined variable OS. So where's OS? Let's import that. Okay, it's imported. Error should go away. Cool. Now let's try running this server again. So for that, if you remember, you do Python and then just the file name. So you're just running a file like normal. Now it's running. Let's preview it and see if things change. And they do. So as you can see now, you see hello world on the browser. And you also see on your terminal screen, it's going to say there was a GET request to this endpoint, the basic slash, at this time on this IP address, and it gave a status of 200, which basically just means success. Cool. And one other thing you can actually do, right now we're running it on the local host, but if you wanted, you could set the host to something else. You could do os.getEnv and set the IP to something. So here I was just seeing from the example, you can do 0.0.0.0, which is like setting it to be an externally visible server. And whenever you make a change to the file, you would have to quit out of the server with Control-C and then rerun it. But we shouldn't actually see any changes here. Everything should work as normal. Now, what else can we do? I think one good thing to remember is just you're going to be running into issues and you're going to want to debug. One useful way of doing that, very simple way, is just to print. So You can print in your function to see, have I actually hit this endpoint? Is something getting stuck in the middle of it, or did I not even reach the endpoint? So I could say reached/endpoint and print that out. And then if we want to test it, again, we'd have to close the server. But one other thing we can do, if we don't want to have to keep closing and restarting the server whenever we make changes, is add debug equals true in your app.run call. And this is going to be really nice. It's just going to allow you to not have to restart anything. Whenever it senses that there's been a code change, it's going to restart the server for you. So you don't have to worry about it, and you don't have to keep running these extra commands. So now I'm going to run this, and let's preview the application one more time and see if our print statement works. So here now you can see reach/endpoint in the terminal. That's awesome. And then what if I want to see an updated print line? So when I click save with this updated file, it shows restarting, and I didn't need to run anything on my own. I just click preview, and here we go, updated print line. Cool. And that's everything with a basic Flask server. Okay, cool. Hopefully you were able to follow along and you have that set up now. Now let's move into more of the HTML side of things. Before I do that, does anybody have any questions about what we were talking about so far? Gavin said nice. Paul is good to go. What was the second to last line? If you're talking about the host, then that's up. You can scroll up in the chat. Oh, Oscar, thank you. Okay, awesome. Well, I'm going to keep going then. What does setting debug to true do, Xavier? Basically what that does is whenever you change something in your Python file, usually you would have to save it, close the server, and then restart it. But if you have debug equals true, then your server will, whenever you change the file, it'll know, and then it'll restart the server for you automatically. So you don't have to go through that process. And the other thing it can do is just give you some more errors on your actual browser if there's like a Python error. I suggest always setting it to true though when you're working. Cool. So we're going to do a quick overview of HTML. Very quick, but I'm going to make sure I provide like a lot of resources if you want to study it a little deeper. Let's start with what HTML stands for. It's Hypertext Markup Language. So it's a markup language, not a programming language. And it's just any code that you're using to structure the web page as well as provide its content. So like the text and pictures and things like that. And yeah, as I said, content can be structured in many ways. Paragraphs with the P tag, bulleted points with the UL tag, and then images and tables and all sorts of stuff. Very basic anatomy of what an HTML element is going to look like. Everything is going to have, for the most part, an opening tag, sometimes a closing tag, and then content. So whatever your text or stuff is. And then that whole thing is going to be your HTML element. Sometimes you don't have a closing tag. That'll be the case when there's no content within there. So there's nothing like that it's wrapping around. An example is like an image. And then another thing you can add in your opening tag is an attribute. So you can think of these as basically like arguments to a function or something like that, where you're setting some extra data on this tag. One of the most common ones that we're going to use is a class, which helps you set some sort of custom CSS that is assigned to that class name. Next thing is anatomy of the HTML document. So not the element, but just your HTML page as a whole. These are some of the key things that you're going to always see and what they mean. The first line, the doc type, you don't really need to worry about what it means, but just know that you have to stick it there and it can be helpful. After that, HTML, that tag is just the root element. So you have the opening one, and then at the end, the closing HTML. And then under that, you're going to have head. And none of the actual content that the user on the browser can see goes in head. The only thing would be like the title, but that title is not on your web page. That title is the title you see like in your Chrome tab or in your whatever tab at the top. The other thing that you'll see in head often is going to be this meta char set, which is basically just saying what are all the characters that can be displayed. Those characters, when you say UTF-8, you're basically saying pretty much every human like written language is covered within that character set. So again, head is like nothing that's actually visible. It's just going to be running like whatever side things you need or side settings. Gabin, what's doc type used for? It's basically just telling your browser like what this web page is. It's like an HTML web page. You don't really need to know like the inner workings of it, so I'm not going to go too deep in. And then body is where the meat of your HTML goes. So that's where all of the content that you actually are seeing on the web page, your text, your images, that's where all of that goes. And here's an example, a p tag with the opening and closing and then text within it. That's just for like a paragraph. So if you have a paragraph of text, then all of that text can go within a p tag. And there's lots of useful HTML elements that we can use. I've shown a few here just to give an example, but you can put text within bold and then, or within the B tag and it bolds it. You can do it with the I tag, it italicizes it. The next one is showing how you can show like a list, a bulleted list in this example. So UL is standing for unordered list. And within UL, each item or each LI is going to be standing for one bullet. So that's how you can do lists. And then last one is you can do links. So basically for links, you have this A tag and you give the URL for what you want to actually link to. And then you have the text for the link that's wrapped inside of the A tags. So here's some basics. Obviously, you don't need to like memorize these right now. Usually when you're doing HTML, you're just going to Google like, how do I do this in HTML? And then somebody's going to have the answer for you. But yeah, just to show you, you can do other things. If you want to have like an audio, like a little player, then you can use the audio tag. You can do an image tag along with like the URL or the file that you're referring to in source. And then another big thing that you can do is have div tags. So these are less about content and more about structure. A div tag is basically saying anything within my divs are going to be one block, and I want to treat them as like one chunk that I can move around and treat, style in one single way. So if you have like different parts of your web page that you're showing and you want to have some way to separate them and treat them differently, then a good way to do that is to have them in separate divs. And then, so there's just going to be this word called templates that's Flask specific. Templates are going to basically allow you to put your HTML into more nicely formatted files and things like that. I'm going to go into what that means when I show you the next demo, though. DeRosa or Giovanni, sorry, I'm mixing up first or last name, but you can make a class for each div. So you can have as many classes as you want. And each div, you could say like div on the first line, class equals thing one, and then you could have div class equals thing two, and then style those two divs separately how you want it. So That's the good thing about classes. They kind of customize to whatever specific element you're talking about. And I'm going to talk about that more once I get into CSS. Okay, so let's go back to the demos, and I'm going to show you HTML when we're using Flask. All right, hope you're ready. Here we go. Okay, so now let's build on this a little bit further. Oh, wait, sorry, wrong one. Let's see. All right, here we are. So now you have a basic overview of how HTML works. Now let's see it in practice when we're using Flask as well. Right now, our Flask server is just returning this lame string, hello world, and it shows up as is on the browser. Showing up like basic strings and objects and stuff, that can be great when we have an API that's returning data. But right now we have a web server that we want to return a more complicated web page for, where you can see stuff that's kind of with more content and structure and things like that. So HTML comes in handy here. How can we use that in Flask? One thing we could do is just directly put in HTML tags within the string that we're returning, and the browser will parse that string accordingly. So basic thing I can start with is to bold my hello world. I'm going to add this B tag here, opening, and then the B tag here, and it's wrapped around my hello world string. So super simple. I saved, and it restarted the terminal because I have debug equals true set here. And now let's see when I preview, then it should be bolded. Cool. So that's great. You can see how we can slowly build on this and add more complexity to the web page that we're building. What's another thing we can do? Maybe we can add a picture. So we can use the image element, and that usually takes in this attribute called source. There's two ways of doing an image. You could either have a static file, a resource that you have saved already in your folder with your code, or you could be referencing a dynamic URL and it can pull from there. I'm going to go with that way just because it's easier and I don't have a picture saved right now. So let's quickly look up a file. I'll do APA because we've been talking about avatar. And let's do this one. He's looking kind of funny here. I can right click, I can copy the image address, and then I can actually set that as the value for the source attribute. So in quotes, I'm going to add this image address. And then finally, I'm just going to have this closing thing right here with the slash. So an image is actually, it's an empty element. There's no kind of child or there's nothing that gets wrapped inside of it. So you don't have like a slash image at the end. You just have a slash and a greater than sign. So I saved it. I'm going to preview. What should we expect? Now it's a little more complex. We should have our text as well as our APA. And here we go. When I preview, I see the big guy here, and we have a cooler web page going. But you can probably see how this is getting a little more complicated. This string can get really long and just annoying to use and parse and look through. So that's where templates actually come in. Flask has this really useful tool or engine called Jinja, where they provide a way to more easily build HTML files and return them to the client. So the way to do that is you can also import this function, render template. And then what you can do here is, I'm going to keep that here actually for later. I'll just comment it out. what you can do is return render template and then the name of your file. So let's just call it very basic index.html. Now we're not ready just yet. I'm going to close out of my server. I'm going to clear. When Flask sees index.html, what it's going to do is look through your current directory, so wherever your app.py lives, and it's going to see if you have a folder called templates. So let's first make that folder, make directory mkdir templates. Let's cd into templates, and then let's create our index.html file in here. So it should have the same name exactly as what you're writing here in the code. Now I'm going to open that up with C9. And it's taking a second. Let's see. Looks like it didn't open up for some reason. I'm just going to open up manually. It's fine. All right. So final thing I want to do is just copy paste this same HTML, that long string I was writing out, and put that into here. So now you have your HTML file. Now let's run the server. Ideally, what we should see is that we're going to see the exact same thing that we were seeing earlier. It says can't open file app.py, no such file. That's because I'm in the templates folder right now. So let's go one up using cd ... Now I'm in lecture 4, and let's run python app.py. So we're running, and I'm going to try previewing it. And here we go. I'm looking at the same page that I was looking at, meaning that I was able to successfully translate my HTML to this file and use a template for it. Awesome. Okay, we're going to move to the next part, but does anybody have any questions with that so far? Okay. Sounds good. And again, I'm going to be posting these demos on YouTube, and I've already posted the slides, which have like a step-by-step of the code. So don't worry if things are moving fast for you. You can always refer to those again later. All right. Krupesh said this is pretty cool. Barnaby's good. Sounds good. Okay, so now let's build on this a little bit further. One thing that we were talking about earlier was the anatomy of an HTML document. Right now, everything worked because the browser can often be very forgiving and fill in the tags for you. But let's write good code and let's do it the way that you're supposed to. So let's fill out that basic anatomy that you usually see. You have your doc type. You should have your root HTML element. You should have your head. And then you should have your body. So cool, I put that there. And everything should, of course, look the same. Nothing's changing here. But now we're using the proper structure and anatomy. Next thing I want to do is just add a few more elements just for fun, because why not? Now we have our whole file for doing this. So I'm going to put H1, which means like a large heading, and H2, so it's a slightly smaller heading. And then I'll put H3, even smaller, and cool. And you can see actually Cloud9 is auto formatting and indenting and things like that on your HTML file, which is nice and useful. Let's see what this looks like. All right, so for okay, here it is. Now you can see your hello world slowly echoing and getting smaller, and then our image as before. I want to show you a good tool for debugging. You might already know about it, you might not. I just opened it up into a separate tab, and you can do Control Shift I or Command Option I, depending on if you're Mac or Windows. You can also just click these three dots, go to More Tools, and then Developer Tools. So I'm on Chrome right now, Chrome Developer Tools, and it's super useful through my work whenever I need to debug something on the UI, especially when we're dealing with HTML and CSS things. So I'm in the console right now, but you can go to Elements, and here you can actually see the HTML for the page that you're on. And if you hover over certain parts, then it's going to actually highlight where that is on the web page that you're looking at. So I'm on H2 and you know exactly where H2 is. So this can be really useful. And we're going to get into this later, but it also is showing like the styles that are included here in the CSS, and it's interactive, so you can change things around and see what happens when you change. So instead of hello world, I could even change this text right here to hello Nelman, and it's gonna reflect that automatically right there. So this is a really good debugging tool. You can see everything that's showing up. Maybe there's an element that's not showing up, or maybe that element is not showing the right style in CSS. And you can find all of that here with the developer tools. Okay, so next thing I want to talk about is there's this concept of like a static versus a dynamic page. Right now, everything that we've been doing is static. So all of the information that we're providing on this website here is hard-coded in some way. I've hard-coded this URL. I've hard-coded this text that I'm showing. So nothing is being dynamically processed. Your server is not really doing any work to show this data. So if I refresh it like 100 times, I'm always going to see the exact same thing. But we can make things dynamic in a few different ways, and templates can be really useful here as well. So let's start with a very simple thing. Let's just show a random number on the page every time that the user visits it. So this is very bare bones. It's not very useful, but it is technically dynamic because whenever you refresh, you're not going to be getting the same sort of output because the server is doing something before you get to the client. So let's use the random library and just generate a random number, and random.randint from 1 to 20. How can I actually show that on the UI side? So how can I pass that down? If I was not working with HTML, then maybe I could have just done return random number, and it would have passed that down. So in that string or whatever, you could have done it. But I want to do it within HTML for now. And the way to do that is you can actually pass in arguments to render template based on Python variables. So I have my file name here, but let's pass in the next argument, and that's going to say num equals random number. And this is basically setting an HTML variable to a Python variable. So I'm saying in HTML, you're going to see something called num that you can refer to wherever you want. And that's going to be associated with this Python variable that I, dynamically got some data from. So I'm going to save that on this side. And then to actually use it in your HTML file, you're going to use some curly brackets. So instead of hello world, let's put the number front and center. So I'm going to have open and close curly brackets, and then you're going to be referring to the left side of the variable that you set. So let's put num there. You can space it out just to make it a little easier to look at. And what should I expect now? Ideally, this right here, this hello world, should change, and it should now be some random number between 1 and 20. And if I keep refreshing, then hopefully we're going to see that the number is changing. So I'm going to preview. I see 10. That's great. But let's make sure it's dynamic. So I press preview again, preview running application, 4, 6, the numbers are changing. And now I can confirm that the server is doing some processing to change this web page before it reaches the client. Cool. Now, if you want to show multiple kind of data variables from the Python server in the client, then you can do that as well. So let's make a list of, let's say, 5 different things. What should I put? TV shows. And I'm going to put Mandalorian. I'm going to put Queen's Gambit. Let's get rid of that apostrophe. I'll put Avatar, put Korra, and I'll put, what else? The Office. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to choose a random integer between 1 and 5 now. So what I can do here, which can be useful, is now I can randomly choose from this list by accessing it from a random index, which is defined right here by this variable. So next thing I'm going to do is my show, which is going to be my HTML variable, is going to be equal to, hey, yeah, let me pause. You want me to go back to the index.html?
Yeah, please.
Sure. Is this good?
Yeah. Okay. I was just trying to see exactly like the curly braces thing. I was trying to figure out how it was actually done.
Yeah, so just whatever your variable is, make sure that it has 2 curly braces on both sides. And Ian, you're totally right. I did the indexes wrong, but I got lucky because 80% of the time it'll be okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. All right, let's keep going. This right here, this hello world, great, but let's make sure it's dynamic. So I press this web page before it reaches the client. Cool. Now, if you want to show multiple kind of data variables from the Python server in the client, then you can do that as well. So let's make a list of, let's say, 5 different things. What should I put? TV shows. Avatar. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to choose a random integer between 1 and 5 now. So what I can do here, which can be useful, is now I can randomly choose from this list by accessing it from a random index, which is defined right here by this variable. So next thing I'm going to do is my show, which is going to be my HTML variable, is going to be equal to TV shows and then random number here, which is my index. And let's see, I'm getting a invalid syntax error. That's because I have multiple arguments here. You need to remember that those commas. Okay. So I'm randomly getting this number, and then I'm choosing amongst some hard-coded list to get one of those options. I quit out of my terminal, so let me just rerun it one more time. And then we haven't actually shown it on our index.html file, so let's do that next. So I'm going to replace the second hello world with my favorite show is, and then you're going to have your curly brackets to reference a dynamic variable. We called it my show, so make sure it's the exact same wording. And then cool. So the first row should show us which index we were choosing, and then the second row should show the actual show. All right, so from here we can see when we ran this that the index was 1, and then that led to my favorite show is Queen's Gambit, which is index 1 here. And I know the numbers versus index might have been a little imperfect here, but you get the point. And that's it. This is kind of a very basic way of how you can make one, a dynamic site, and two, integrate HTML to have some more complicated content. Okay, nice. Hopefully you guys were able to follow along. It's slowly getting more and more interesting when you can start doing playing with data and Python variables and things like that. All right, any more questions about that before we move into the CSS part of things? Sounds good. Is the loop done on Python side? No, so the loop's actually done on your HTML file within curly braces. So within those curly braces, you can do more logic, and one of those things can be iterating through a list. So I'm not going to teach you how to use HTML like deeply. You're going to have to definitely do research on your own. I provided these two links. I think that the Mozilla or MDN docs are really good for front-end related stuff. So the first one provides like an HTML basics kind of tutorial. And then the second one just has a ton of different guides that you can look into. But if you have like more questions, you can always come to office hours and we can go through some things, or you can post on Slack and your classmates can help you answer them. All right, so now we are going to do a crash course on CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it basically describes how the content is going to look on a web page. So you're saying these HTML elements are going to have this style. So it's tightly integrated with your HTML. And you can do a lot of different things. You can do like positioning on the page. You can do color of things. You can do the opacity. You can do like animations, borders, everything, like anything you can think of with like design. And there's going to be properties for those. So basic anatomy of a CSS rule set, which is what we're referring to here. This entire thing is going to be like a rule set. You start with the selector, which is the P in this example. And that's basically saying for your P elements in HTML, I want to do these stylings. So your selector is going to be where you can choose like what HTML elements you want to style. And that selector can be a couple things we're going to talk about, but you could do things like body, you could do H1, you could do div. So all of these different elements that we were using in the last 20 minutes could all be used as a selector and then styled appropriately. And then within the selector, you're going to have a list. So it can be one or more properties. The property is where you're defining the actual thing that you want to change. So font size, color, border, position, things like that. And those are all property names, and you can find them online. And then those properties are going to have the values. So color, you can do red, blue, you can do the hex codes for colors. And then depending on the property, it's going to have different types of values. So that's the kind of rule set at its most basic. One thing I want to emphasize is about how you can use classes. So if we think about this sort of selector we were talking about, if I wanted to style one item in a list that I have, so you can see on the left, I have an unordered list with 3 list items inside of it. If I just use the li tag as my selector, then whatever style I'm choosing is going to apply to all of my list items, not just one of them. But maybe I want to like highlight one list item and have a more customized style for it. If that's the case, then that's where classes come into use. And you're probably going to use classes the most because it's probably pretty common that you're going to have multiple HTML elements that are the same type, but you don't necessarily want them to all be looking the same. So as you can see in this top line of code, the second list item, I set the class attribute to special here. And then what you do is in your CSS, you need to have something called special there. So you define a class with a period at the beginning and then the name of the class. So dot special. And then that's my selector now. I'm only talking about anything with the special class. I don't care if it's a list item. I don't care if it's a div. If it has this name, then it can have the styles underneath. And I'm going to say I want it to be orange text and I want the font to be bolded. So that's my rule set. And then as you can see here on the right, only one of those would have the orange and bold out of the 3 list items. And Paul, you do need to call the specific CSS file. I'm going to go over that in the demo soon. Another thing that you can do is have state selectors, which basically means that an HTML element could have different states. For example, A is the element for a link. Now, your browser knows if the link is being hovered over or not, depending on where your mouse is. And you could actually use this colon, so A:hover. And that's basically saying only when the link is being hovered on, I want to do some special style. So I'm sure you've seen on websites, like when you hover over, then sometimes they do special things, like they'll highlight the text and things like that. So this is where that's coming from when you use a hover state selector. And then I listed out, there's tons of useful CSS properties. You can change the background colors. You can do stuff with fonts. You can do alignment. So you want to like center text versus having it left aligned. You can add borders to boxes, margin and padding. I included a diagram here for you to refer back to later, but that's kind of showing when you have different elements, how much space is between them. So you may have noticed if you've done like basic HTML that everything's kind of squished together and there's no like padding in that sense. There's not much spacing between things and that can make it look pretty janky. So that's where margin and padding can come into play. Height and width for just basic sizing. And then display is something interesting for those who want to go like deeper into CSS. And you can do some cool things with positioning. So you might see websites with like tiles with like a bunch of little cards or something aligned across a row. For those sorts of cases, you can use something called Flexbox, and it's a really robust system and probably the modern way that we do positioning and layout for elements now. And I'm going to provide some resources so you can read up on it, and you can always come to office hours and talk to me about it. But for now, let's just go a little bit deeper into our app and actually use CSS in it. Okay. Oh yeah, so this one, I was up at like 2 a.m. trying to make this last demo work. And I think I got like 90% of the way there, but Cloud9 was just being a total pain in the ass. So it's not going to go like fully deep, but it should give you whatever you need. Christopher, you're asking if it's okay to use Bootstrap. That's basically a CSS library where they preset different styles. And you totally can if you know how. And we can talk about it if others want to do that later on. Okay, so let's do our final demo of the day now. All right, so now let's start working with the CSS like understanding that we have and start applying it to our actual web page that we've been building. So what if I want to start by maybe adding some color to what we have, like changing the background color? How would we apply or use that CSS within our HTML? So there's a few ways of doing it. One way is you can actually add CSS directly inside of an HTML element, and that can be called inline styling. Another way is within the head, and if you remember from our anatomy, the head is just going to be that portion of the document in the HTML that doesn't have any content that the user actually sees. So it's just like other stuff, basically. And in that other stuff, we could have a style tag. And within those style tags, we could put all of our normal CSS. So like we could say body, and then, color, something, blah, blah, blah. Now, I'm not going to actually write through these because these are two ways that I don't actually prefer. The one I would go with is to have a separate centralized CSS style sheet file that the HTML refers to. Now, why would I go with that route? There's a few reasons. One is adding all of the CSS in your HTML can make it messy. So just kind of separating out those concerns, the styling versus the content, can make for cleaner code. Another thing is, if you think about more complicated applications, they're going to have like 10, 20 different web pages. And if each one has to have its own style written in there, then it'll make it tough to maintain that consistency across all of them. So if you change the font in one page or in one HTML file, then you have to change it in the other 9. And that can just be a lot of upkeep. So whenever you're rewriting and kind of replicating the same style and code over and over, a good engineer always thinks about like, how can you put that in a single place that all the files can reference. So to do that, we are going to use this line of code called starting with a link tag. And this is basically going to be telling the browser to go fetch some external resource. And that resource here is going to be our CSS file. So we're actually going to be defining our CSS file in our server code as a static resource, similar to if we had an image or something defined in our code that we wanted to then pass down to the client. The CSS file is another example of those. And basically what happens is the browser is going to, it's going to get back this HTML page when it makes a request to the server. And it's only going to have the HTML to start with. But then as it's parsing the HTML, it's going to read through these head tags, and it's going to see, oh, here's a link. It's asking me to fetch an external resource. And where should it fetch it from? This is where the href attribute comes in. You're going to give a URL here. Now I'm using the curly braces. If you remember, that's being used for dynamic variables coming from the Python server side. In this case, in these braces, we're actually using a Flask specific method that is going to take your static file or resource, in this case, that CSS file, and it's going to convert it to a URL that the browser can fetch. So you're going to put URL for and then static to start with, and then the file name is equal to style.css. We haven't actually made that file yet, but that's what it's going to be called. And then make sure you have a closing parentheses there.
They're trying, Josiah. They're trying.
So this line of code is going to be what connects your HTML to an. Sorry, what'd you say, Lasha?
Oh, I'm sorry. Might be unmuted.
Oh, okay. No worries. External CSS file. I'm going to save that. Next thing I'm going to do is the URL that's provided here, it's going to be looking in a specific folder called the static folder. This doesn't exist yet in my lecture 4 directory. So I'm going to first make a static folder, make directory static. And then I'm just going to change some commands here. I'm going to do cd change directory into static. And then after that, I am going to create my file. So I want to create the style.css file and make sure it's the same name that you're providing in the HTML. And that's it. So here we go. We have style.css working here in the static folder. Let's open that up. And then let's finally write some CSS in here. So I was talking about changing the color earlier. One way to do that is just by addressing the body tag as the selector. So it's the whole page. And I'm going to use the property background color to set the color. And then let's do hot pink, which is, funny enough, a variable that is actually stored as a preset color. So that should look fun. I'm just waiting for this to save. I don't know why it's still spinning. Hopefully it should work. All right. Still, okay. I just exited out, but hopefully it should be fine. Yeah. All right, so now I'm gonna go back to my lecture 4 folder and I'm gonna run my app. So that's running. And when I preview, then hopefully based on the CSS that I'm providing and the body tag here, we should have a pink background. And there we go. Now this web page is 2 times as fun. So we have the pink. What else can we do here? Well, one thing I actually want to show you is, let's open this up in a separate browser. I don't know why this just changed to orange on its own. That's a little weird. My Cloud9's been really hacky in general, so let's just pretend that's pink. And then let's open up our developer tools on Chrome. So I had given a shortcut earlier, but you can also right click anywhere and then do inspect, and that'll automatically open to it and highlight what you were inspecting. So we were talking about how you can see the HTML. Another cool thing you can actually do is see all of the CSS that is assigned to a given element. So right now, if I'm looking at Hello World, we can see the style that it has is actually inheriting it from the H3 tag that I'm giving in the HTML. And that's causing some of these things. So you can see like the font size is a certain size. The weight is bolded, so it's a bolded text and things like that. And something further you can actually do is just play around within the developer tool itself without adding any CSS code on your actual workspace. So just within the browser, you can test things out. So what would this look like if my hello world text was pink? And let's choose deep pink this time. So this isn't actually in the code, but because I'm using my developer tools, I can play around and test things out. So that's really awesome. You can do other things like, let's see if I set the margin to be 12px. So I basically added some padding around it, and that can be represented by this orange box that's shaded around Hello World. Cool. So just remember, this can be a really useful tool for you whenever you're playing around with CSS and HTML. All right. So hopefully now we have all the different pieces. Gavin, does it update the source code too? No. So this is all being done when you play with the developer tools. It's all just being done on that browser. If you refresh, it'll go away. But it's good just if you want to see like how would something look if I added this, and then you can slowly figure out what CSS you want to actually use in your final product. So yeah, I know we went fast with both HTML and CSS, but again, this class is not about teaching you each of the specific technologies. It's just providing you the tools and resources so you can pick them up on your own, which is what we end up having to do on the job. So remember, Google is your best friend. Half the time when I'm writing CSS, I'm just going to say, how do I do blank in CSS? And then you're going to find what you need. So don't worry about that. And let's see, some things here. Always move your style sheet. Always move the CSS to a separate style sheet instead of using it inline in HTML. And then I provided some resources here also from the MDN docs from Mozilla. The first one is just kind of one of those basic tutorials again. So I think it covers all of the big picture things that you can do with CSS. So if you want to do that, I definitely recommend it. And then I have some other links here too. So this is all the content I wanted to cover, but now I wanted to give you guys, let's see, we don't have 15 minutes, we have like 12 minutes left. So let's say I'm going to give you guys 10 minutes of independent work time. I know it's not a lot, but hopefully you can get a chance to start on your homework 4, play around with it, and ask me any questions while I'm here. So I'll give you 10 minutes, and then I'm going to ask you to come back at 10:19 just so we can close out and I can give some closing announcements before I send you off. So take this time. Let me know if you have any questions while you're starting up on the homework. And we will be back at 10:19. All right. I'm just going to give some closing announcements and I'll stay back for 10 minutes after class if you guys have any questions or want to stay on to finish the homework. So for next time, just make sure that you can finish homework 4. It's going to be really good so that you have all of that basic knowledge to start project 1 and get that web server running. And I encourage you, if you can and you have time, to definitely start project 1 now. So every little chunk that you do earlier is going to help you save a lot of time right before the deadline comes and things get more busy. And in your homework 4, since we're going to be starting about Git next time, and also you need Git for submitting your projects and stuff, please include your GitHub username so that I can then add you to our class organization. And that's going to be one of the questions on the homework. You'll see it. That's pretty much all I wanted to say in closing announcements. Next class, we'll be talking about Git as well as using APIs. And that'll give you pretty much 80% of what you need for doing the project. All right. Thank you guys all for coming today. Hope you can nap later on in case you're tired. And if you have any questions, please stay back or come to office hours. I'm going to be here at 3 to 4 and 8 to 9 as well. All right. Fixed it, Jessica. Glad to see. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a good weekend. Have a good week. Thanks, Oscar, Ian. Good luck with GameStop. Keep going up. Bye, Pranavi, Hemant, Oscar. Bye, Yazin. Bye, Paul. Bye, Asane. Bye, Jay. Bye, Jessica. Christopher, if you want to start, don't worry. I guess I can send you or I can post on Canvas like how to initialize the Git repository just locally, like not on our GitHub organization. So you're still going to have the commits locally on your computer. But otherwise, just start. It's okay. You can always do more commits as you're going next week. Enjoy your weekend. Yeah. Abhishek, Andre, Gavin, Krupesh, Lasha, does anybody have any questions or hanging out, working? No worries. I can stay on in case you have questions.